What is the creepiest real-life story you know that still sends chills down your spine? It was about 3 years ago. We had just gotten a new kid in our class. I'll call him Marcus, not his real name. At the time, I was really into mountain biking, so I teamed up with him and a couple of friends. I'll call them Andrew and Dominic. We went to an off-road area that was specifically organized for mountain biking. Along the trail, there was a ramp that some kids had built, so we decided to try it. Since my bike was pretty crappy, I couldn't jump the ramp, so I stayed back while the others went ahead. Marcus was in front of me, going around 40 kilometers per hour. He crashed into a small tree, but I didn't see it happen. Dominic started screaming, saying, "Marcus crashed," but I thought he was joking, because he was a good actor and kind of the jester of the group. When I got there, I saw Marcus's bike jammed into the branches of the tree and him lying on the ground, clearly confused about what had just happened. He was grunting, and then he looked at me. There was blood all over his mouth and a large injury on his forehead, close to his temple. I immediately called emergency services. When the ambulance arrived, they took Marcus right away and rushed him to a nearby town. I remember that Andrew and I took his bike back into town and tried to hide it in an apartment building, because none of us could take it home. Marcus's mother later called us, and his father threatened to send us to a correction center or summer school. Because my phone died right after I finished the call with emergency services, I couldn't contact them again. They ended up tracking us down and took Dominic and me back to the place where the crash happened. I almost ended up in preventive detention because of that, but instead I later ate something with Andrew. It was the most traumatic event I have ever experienced. Seeing the new kid looking at me while his brain was fighting for his life still sends chills down my spine to this day. If you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to subscribe for more. Dead kid in the backyard. We lived in a small ancestral compound with my family, relatives, and a few tenants. We all got along pretty well. In the early 2000s, we would usually hang out in the living room watching Filipino telenovelas while my cousins and I played cards in the corner. It was a tight-knit community. There was one tenant, a student. We'll call her Mary. She was kind of aloof, but weeks before the incident she started acting strange. She barely came out of her room and seemed distant and blank. My mother would often check on her, asking how she was doing, how school was going, and if anything was bothering her. I remember that day very clearly. It was around 2 in the morning. My cousins and I were watching our uncles prepare pigs for an event the next day. My mom came into my room and scolded us for still being awake since it was past midnight. Then suddenly, there was a scream. There was a dead infant in our backyard. It was horrifying. The baby had been strangled with her own umbilical cord, her neck was broken, and a mop head had been forced into her mouth. Her throat was destroyed beyond recognition. She had been placed inside a clear plastic bag, bloody and messy. My mom quickly pulled us away, but I caught a glimpse of that poor baby hanging near our dirty kitchen. I will never forget that image. It was Mary. We realized it because there were blood trails leading straight to her room. She had been afraid of her parents finding out she was pregnant. She was depressed and clearly not in her right state of mind at the time. The next morning, her parents arrived, along with the police and paramedics. I believe she was taken to a psychiatric facility. That part is a little hazy now, but the disturbing details are still burned into my memory. The creepiest part came days later. I overheard people saying that my mother was being haunted by the child. It was an old house with large built-in cabinets, and she would sometimes hear crying coming from inside the wardrobe. She heard small footsteps, crackling noises, and even saw visions of a child inside a bloody plastic bag in the hallway. We never understood why it only happened to my mom. A few months later, we all left the compound. About 10 years ago, I was in my early 20s, studying abroad in London. One weekend, I spontaneously booked a solo trip to Venice. I didn't really tell anyone in my study abroad program that I was going, I just went. It was a wonderful trip overall, but there's one moment from it that still sticks with me to this day. On the second day of my weekend trip, I was wandering aimlessly around Venice, just exploring the streets. I didn't have phone service, so there was no GPS. It started raining, and I began heading back to my accommodations, but I was kind of lost. Out of nowhere, a handsome older man appeared and offered to shield me with his umbrella. We struck up a brief conversation, and when I told him I was American, he insisted on showing me around Venice and taking me to a cafe. I really didn't want to, but I was trying to be polite, so I agreed. We walked for about 20 minutes, passing tons of cafes along the way. Gradually, we moved farther away from the busy, touristy areas, and I started to feel anxious. I asked him how much farther it was, and he said not much, explaining that he wanted to give me an authentic Italian experience, not a tourist spot. Suddenly, we came to an alley branching off from a small plaza with a few shops. The alley was dark and completely empty, no people, no signs of life. There were only heavy wooden doors that looked like they led to apartments or private residences. There were no signs or storefronts that looked anything like a cafe. We stopped at the entrance to the alley, and he said, "Okay, this is the way," with a big, unsettling grin, then gestured for me to walk ahead of him. I completely froze. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me not to go down that alley with this stranger. I told him I was sorry and that I hadn't realized how late it had gotten, and that I was supposed to meet a friend who was flying in at my hotel, a total lie. He looked crestfallen and kept insisting that we continue. I held my ground and quickly walked in a different direction, heading toward a shop we had passed, hoping to get back around other people and find shelter there until he left. He followed me and wouldn't leave me alone. I don't even remember how I finally managed to lose him, but eventually I did. He could have been a genuinely kind person trying to make Italy special for a foreigner, but the gut instinct I felt at the entrance to that alley was overwhelming. It felt like if I had walked down there, I would have left Venice in a boat under a tarp, on my way to be trafficked. I'll never know what would have happened, but that moment has stayed with me ever since. I believe my dead mother warned both my grandma and me that my sister was sneaking out. My sister and I were sleeping at my grandparents' house. She was younger, boy crazy, and involved with the wrong kind of guy, and she decided to sneak out without anyone knowing. To this day, I can't explain what happened next. The smoke detectors suddenly started going off, like the house was full of smoke. But everything was completely fine. There was no fire, no smoke, nothing at all, yet every detector in the house was blaring. I jumped awake and threw my bedroom door open, but I didn't see anything wrong. I walked down the hallway to check on my sister, and that's when I realized her bed was empty. I panicked and ran to my grandma's room to wake her up, though she was already awake because of the alarms. I told her my sister wasn't in the house. After about 10 minutes, my sister finally sneaked back in, barely managing to be quiet. Before my grandma or I could even start yelling at her, the smoke detectors suddenly stopped. Just like that. There was no explanation. No reason. Nothing. Later that night, after my sister got punished and went to her room, my grandma and I talked about everything that had happened. That's when she told me that my mom had always been extremely serious about fire safety. When my mom was younger, her best friend lost her home in a fire, and because of that, my mom became the family firefighter. She made sure we always knew where the fire extinguisher was, checked the smoke detector batteries, and drilled the escape plan into us so thoroughly that I still remember it to this day. I sometimes go dark in my own head and completely black out. It hasn't happened in years, but two particular moments stand out to me. The most recent one happened when I had gone to sleep and suddenly woke up standing at the foot of the stairs. Completely confused, I stared down the stairs for a couple of seconds, until I nearly jumped out of my skin when my father said my name from behind me. He was apparently holding me back and preventing me from going downstairs. My parents later told me that my mother had come into my room to check on me, and I woke up screaming, scratching her to get away, and trying to run downstairs before my father caught me. I have no memory of any of this happening. I would have chalked it up to some kind of extreme fight or flight sleepwalking episode, except that this kind of blackout, where my body moves on its own, had happened before. When I was in elementary school, one early morning I went to school like normal, except my tired brain forgot to change out of my pajama shirt. Just as I was about to step into the school, everything went black and silent. The next thing I knew, I came back while walking out of the school at the end of the day. I had absolutely no memory of what happened during the day, only that school was over and it was time to go home. The worst part is that this felt normal to me at the time. It had happened multiple times before I would black out and then seemingly wake up at a completely different point in time. In the earliest parts of my life, I often felt more like a passenger in my own body, as if someone else was making the choices while I was just watching, until I reached a certain age. When I was in an active ketamine addiction, I was best friends with a girl who had very severe borderline personality disorder. She was actually the one who introduced me to ketamine. Her usual way of getting drugs was flirting with or sleeping with her dealer, or bringing a hot friend, which I guess was me. Most of the time, we'd just get it for free, hang out for an hour, and drive back home. She had another friend she claimed to absolutely hate because that girl was also a heavy drug user with bad BPD. Still, she kept hanging out with her and pretending to be her friend because she thought she was too dumb, rich, always had drugs, and knew about a lot of raves and parties. At the same time, she genuinely despised her. One day, I was leaving work when I ran into them by coincidence. They were celebrating that girl's birthday. Later, my friend admitted she invited me because she couldn't deal with her anymore. The girl was completely out of control, nodding off in public because she was doing full lines of ketamine, not bumps, and she was drunk on top of it. She was a serious drug veteran. One night at my ex-friend's house, it was me, my ex-friend, the birthday girl, and her other friend all hanging out in my ex-friend's room. My ex-friend and the other girl went out to buy alcohol, but the birthday girl had to stay behind because she was so out of it. I stayed with her to watch her. I actually talked to her for the first and last time that night. We talked about spirituality, and I did her birthday makeup because she kept complimenting my eye look. She was genuinely very nice, just surrounded by a horrible crowd. They came back with a bottle of Summer in a Bottle white wine. We all drank, and the girl started doing more lines of ketamine. Maybe 4 or 5. By the 4th line, her friend giggled and said, "Girl, don't be selfish, you gotta share," and the birthday girl kept saying no, that it was her birthday. By the 5th line, that's when the scary shit started. I looked away for a second, then looked back, and she started convulsing. She was convulsing right in front of me, and I froze. Her friend tried to help her up while laughing, saying, "See, this is why you shouldn't be selfish, girl." The girl was knocking out, nodding in and out, and both of them were actively trying to get her up to go to the bar. They kept saying, "Come on, get up, we gotta go." She was completely knocked out, unable to stand, and they were still trying to drag her out. I secretly recorded during this because I didn't know what else to do. It was just the two of them trying to force her up to go to the bar while she was unconscious. I knew my ex-friend could be cruel, but this felt evil. Sinister. I kept telling them, she needs a hospital. She needs a hospital. She can't go. She needs a hospital. Both of them refused, saying she would freak out, get angry, and never talk to them again. Instead, they were trying to take a nodding, convulsing girl to a bar. It made no sense. She couldn't even stand against the wall. I was terrified. I genuinely believed she was going to die right there. Watching her eyes roll back and her body convulse is burned into my brain. I felt completely alone. They refused to do anything except go out. I recorded again while they tried to make her stand and put flip-flops on her, giggling the whole time. We eventually went outside, where she kept collapsing and couldn't stand at all. At that point, I was too scared and just wanted to leave. They made me feel like I was overreacting. Eventually, they put her in the back of an Uber or taxi, and I went home. Somehow, the movement snapped her awake. She suddenly yelled, "Why? No, stay. Let's party." They all left, completely unaware of how close things had come. Later, my ex-friend told me they went to Burger King and then to the dealer's place to do more drugs. Eventually, they left her on the sidewalk a few blocks from her house because they couldn't handle her BPD and drug habits. I don't think she even remembers, because they kept talking and hanging out afterward. The memory of her convulsing in real life is glued into my brain. I truly thought I was going to watch someone die. A month later, she passed away. Not from her addiction, but because she was murdered. A Tinder date lured her with hard drugs, she overdosed, and he hid all the evidence. That poor girl was surrounded by the worst possible people. I still feel horrible for not speaking up more. I still cry when that image replays in my head. Rest in peace, Mel. I'm sorry we weren't close. I wish we had been. You deserved better friends. One of my creepiest personal experiences happened when my brother and I were going to attend a basketball game in Seattle. We rented an Airbnb to spend the night afterward. This was back when Airbnb was still somewhat reasonable, so we rented a small, very affordable older house in the Ballard area for the night. We arrived in the afternoon before the game to drop off our stuff and have a couple of beers, and as we walked around the place, we noticed that it felt very thrown together and neglected. The furniture was all out of place, everything was pretty dated and in disrepair, and there was a hole torn open in the wall under the porch that looked like someone had been crawling under there and sleeping. It wasn't a huge deal, though. It was cheap, so we went out to eat and then to the game. When we got back, it was dark outside, and as we walked into the kitchen, it suddenly looked like years had passed. Things were covered in a layer of dust that definitely hadn't been there before. A pendant light hanging over the dining table in a small nook in the back was covered in a heavy layer of dust, and someone had drawn the words, "Help me," into the dust on top of it with their finger. It had not been like that earlier, and we had been standing right there before, since the refrigerator was right next to the table. We started getting creeped out, so when we heard footsteps and other noises after that, we tried to tell ourselves we were just spooked. I went and fell asleep in my room, but my brother woke me up not long after. He looked really shaken. He asked me if I had gotten up and used the shower, because he heard someone slam the shower curtain open and then shut, and he saw shadows and heard footsteps running into and out of the hallway several times. I got up, and we started exploring a bit more. That's when we first opened the door to the basement. As soon as we did, the creepiness intensified immediately. The place seemed to hum with a sinister kind of energy. We went down to check it out, and there was that unmistakable lingering smell of rotten meat and bleach, the kind of smell you get when someone's freezer dies while they're on vacation and all the meat rots, and the odor sticks around for years no matter what they do. There was a door leading out the back and up a few steps to a very hidden, covered carport off the alley. Right inside that door was another door leading to a small, empty, square concrete room, like an old canning cellar. It had a deadbolt on the outside and no handle at all on the inside. The feeling I got from that place stayed with me for weeks.